Greetings, traveler of the night. I am Milo. I am here beside you, walking with you. Perhaps you have never realized this before, but there are invisible forces that have been quietly shaping your life long before you could ever name them. They appear in recurring dreams, in familiar emotions you cannot explain, in symbols that stir your heart, even when your mind does not understand why. Carl Jung called them archetypes, primordial patterns of the psyche, and he believed they do not merely exist within your mind. They quietly rule your life, gently guiding every choice, every fear, and every hidden longing. Over the next 2 hours, we will not try to learn archetypes as an abstract concept. We will recognize them through ancient symbols, through images that feel familiar to your soul, and through your own inner experience. Jung once wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Tonight, this video will help you look into that place, not to change who you are, but to help you understand why you have always been yourself. And when you begin to understand that, a deep and quiet peace will slowly unfold within you. For now, allow yourself to relax. Allow yourself to listen. And let the archetypes speak. You are enough. And you have always been enough. Part 1. Echoes from the Empty Rooms. Let us begin with an image you can feel, not with your intellect, but with something deeper within you. Imagine that your mind is not a scattered stream of thoughts, but an ancient house that existed long before you ever became aware of yourself. Its walls are not built of brick, but of memories, emotions, and experiences you do not fully remember yet, which are still alive within you. Long corridors covered in shadow, doors left slightly open, and you, as the one who lives there, have always believed that you are the owner of every room. And yet, there are moments that feel strangely familiar. You notice that you keep returning to the same room, even though you never consciously chose it. You respond in the same way to the same kind of wound. You feel an invisible fear when standing at the same threshold of change. You find yourself drawn to the same kind of person, even when your rational mind has warned you that this path may lead to pain. And you begin to wonder why. Why, even though you believe yourself to be free, do you continue to walk paths you never consciously chose? Carl Gustav Jung devoted his life to listening to these silent questions within the human soul. And he discovered that there are forces deeper than the ego, deeper than willpower, operating beneath the surface of consciousness. He called them archetypes. Jung wrote, in the archetypes and the collective unconscious. The archetype is a tendency to form representations of a motif, representations that can vary a great deal in detail without losing their basic pattern. This means that archetypes are not specific images you can see or touch. They are not personal memories you can simply recall. They are invisible patterns, primordial potentials for perceiving and responding that have existed within the deepest structure of the human psyche for thousands of years before you were born. They are like invisible molds shaping how you love, how you fear, how you hope, and how you search for meaning in your life. You did not learn how to feel loneliness. You were not taught how to long for belonging. No one needed to instruct you on how to fear the darkness. These responses already existed within you, like ancient traces of human experience carried forward across countless generations. Jung called this deepest layer of the mind the collective unconscious. He wrote, "The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. The structure and dynamics of the psyche." Pause for a moment and allow these words to settle within you. It means that your mind did not begin from nothing when you were born. You were never a blank page. You are the continuation of an invisible current stretching across thousands of years of human history. The fears of your ancestors, their dreams, their battles, their hopes, all of it still lives within you, not as memory, but as structure. This is why the house within your mind was not entirely built by you. You are the one who came to live inside it. The rooms already existed. The corridors were designed long ago. And sometimes, when you enter a certain room, it is not you who chose it. The room itself called you back. This is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are human. And the most important truth Jung wanted you to understand was not that you are trapped within these structures, but that you can become conscious of them. Because the moment you recognize that invisible forces are influencing you, you are no longer completely governed by them. Jung wrote one of his most famous and life-changing insights. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Perhaps, for many years, you have called the repeating patterns in your life fate. You believed you were simply that kind of person. You believed life had randomly led you into the same kinds of pain, the same kinds of loss, the same kinds of disappointment. But Jung saw something deeper. He understood that it was not fate. It was the archetypes operating in the shadows of your psyche, repeating ancient patterns until you begin to see them. And this is where true freedom begins. Not freedom from the archetypes, because they are part of the deepest structure of who you are, but freedom through awareness. When you begin to see the rooms within the house of your mind, when you begin to recognize the corridors you have unconsciously walked for so many years, when you begin to understand that parts of you are older than the name you carry, older even than the story you tell about yourself. In that awareness, something begins to change. You are no longer the one asleep inside your own house. You become the one who is awakening within it. And as you continue along this journey, you will begin to realize that this house is not a prison. It is a map that leads you back to the deepest, truest, and most whole part of yourself. Part 2. The pain of endless loops. And then, as you begin to walk more consciously within the house of your inner world, when you are no longer wandering aimlessly, but instead listening to the echoes from its silent rooms, another truth slowly begins to reveal itself. You realize that there are certain rooms you have not simply passed through once by accident, but places you return to again and again. Not because you want to, not because you choose to, but because some invisible force within you seems to draw you back like an orbit you cannot easily escape. And it is here that you begin to touch one of the most painful experiences of being human, the feeling that your life is repeating itself. Perhaps it appears in your relationships. You meet someone new, and you hope that this time will be different. You believe that you are wiser now that you understand yourself more deeply, that you have learned from the wounds of the past. But over time, a familiar feeling begins to emerge, a quiet coldness you cannot immediately name. Familiar conflicts, familiar pain, familiar moments when you realize you are becoming the very person you once tried to escape. And when it ends, you look back and ask yourself, why did this happen again? Or perhaps it is not love, but fear. Perhaps you stand before an opportunity, a doorway that could change your life. You feel the impulse to move forward. But just before you cross that threshold, something inside you contracts. A voice whispers that you are not enough, that you will fail, that you should return to safety. And before you even realize it, you have turned away from your own possibility. Later, you call it reality. You call it personality. You call it fate. But Carl Jung saw a different truth. A truth that may feel unsettling at first, but ultimately brings profound liberation. He realized that these loops are not random. They are not coincidence, and they are not evidence that you are weak. They are signs that ancient forces are at work beneath the surface of your consciousness. Jung wrote with unmistakable clarity, "As long as you do not make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Pause and truly feel the meaning of these words. It means that much of your life may be shaped by forces you have never seen. Not because you lack intelligence, not because you lack willpower, but because these forces do not exist in the light of awareness. They exist in the shadows, in depths you rarely look into. And when you do not recognize them, they do not disappear. They simply continue to operate, to repeat and to shape your choices from behind the scenes. Jung described this condition as a kind of possession by unconscious contents. He wrote in The Archetypes and the collective unconscious. When an archetype appears in a dream, in fantasy, or in life, it always brings with it a peculiar numinosity or fascination, and consequently exerts an effect that is either inhibiting or stimulating. This means that when an archetype is activated, it is not merely an idea. It is a living force. It carries an energy that can sweep you away, that can fascinate you, that can lead you to act in ways you may not fully understand afterward. This is why, at times, you may look back at your own behavior and feel like a stranger to yourself. You may ask, why did I react so strongly? Why was I so afraid? Why did I love so blindly? In those moments, it is not your entire conscious self that is in control. Something deeper, something older, has stepped forward. This is not a sign that something is broken within you. It is a sign of depth because, according to Jung, The human psyche is not a single unified entity, but a complex ecosystem in which many forces coexist. He wrote in 2 essays on analytical psychology. The psyche is not a unity, but a multiplicity, a complex structure. And within that complex structure, the ego, the part you call I, is not always the absolute center of power. It is only a small part rising above the surface of a much greater ocean. Beneath it lies the personal unconscious, and deeper still lies the collective unconscious, where archetypes exist like primordial currents shaping how you experience the world from within. This is why these loops can feel so powerful, because they are not merely habits. They are expressions of much deeper structures. They are attempts by the deeper psyche to complete something the ego does not yet understand. And this is where pain begins to transform into an invitation, because the moment you begin to see these loops, not as a sentence, but as a signal, you step out of the role of the one being controlled and into the role of the one who observes. You begin to realize that what you once called fate is in truth a language, an ancient language through which the deeper mind is speaking to you, not to imprison you, but to awaken you. And in that awareness, for the first time, you are no longer completely possessed by these invisible forces. You begin to see them. And when you see them, a new space opens, a space where true freedom can finally begin to take form. Part 3. The crystal axis of the soul. And as you begin to realize that the loops in your life are not random, that invisible forces have been quietly shaping your choices, your emotions, and your reactions from behind the curtain of consciousness, a deeper question begins to form. If you are not entirely the one creating these patterns, then what has created them? If your pain is not solely your personal story, then to what greater reality does it belong? And it is precisely at this intersection between confusion and awakening that Carl Jung offered one of the most beautiful and profound images in all of depth psychology. He said that archetypes are like the axis of a crystal. Pause and truly imagine this. Before a crystal forms, before it takes on any visible shape that your eyes can perceive, an invisible structure already exists. An axis, an organizing principle. You cannot touch it. You cannot see it. Yet it determines how the molecules will arrange themselves, how the final form will emerge, how beauty will manifest in the material world. Without that axis, there would be no shape, no structure, no crystal. Jung used this image to help you understand a truth that carries deep liberation. What you experience in your life, the patterns you repeat, the pain you carry, the longings you cannot explain, are not random errors. They are expressions of deeper structures, structures that existed long before you were born. Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective, unconscious. Archetypes are like riverbeds which dry up when the water deserts them, but which it can find again at any time. This means that archetypes are not fixed images, but potential patterns. They are like riverbeds that have existed for ages. And when the waters of your life begin to flow, they naturally find those paths. You may believe that you are choosing your direction, but often the current has already been shaped by the invisible structure of the riverbed. This does not make you weaker. On the contrary, it places you within a larger, deeper, and more meaningful context. Because if what you experience is not solely your personal story, then it also means that you are not alone within it. There is a profound comfort in this realization. Your pain is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that you are human, that you are living within a psychological structure shared by countless generations before you. Jung wrote with clarity, "The collective unconscious is identical in all men, and thus constitutes a common psychic substrate of a suprapersonal nature, which is present in every one of us." The structure and dynamics of the psyche. This means that what you feel does not belong only to you. The fear of abandonment, the longing to be loved, the pain of betrayal, the urge to become something greater than yourself. All of these have been felt before by people you will never meet in times you will never live. And these patterns continue to live on, not as memories, but as structure. You are not living only your own life. You are participating in a story far more ancient. This is why, at times, your reactions may feel larger than the present moment. A small rejection may awaken a deep and overwhelming pain. A moment of loss may open an emotional abyss you cannot fully explain. This happens because you are not responding only to the present. You are responding through a structure shaped long ago. You are responding through the invisible axis of the crystal of your soul. And yet, this is also where peace begins to emerge. Because when you understand that this structure exists, You stop blaming yourself for patterns you cannot immediately change. You stop seeing your pain as a personal failure. You begin to see it as part of a greater process, a process Jung called individuation. He wrote, individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost last and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. 2 essays on analytical psychology. This process is not about destroying the old structure. It is about becoming conscious of it. Because you cannot change what you cannot see. But the moment you begin to see this invisible axis, you are no longer completely governed by it. A small distance appears, a small space between you and the old patterns. And within that space, something new can be born conscious choice. This does not happen in a single night. It unfolds gradually, just as a crystal forms slowly, precisely, and according to a deeper logic that you do not need to force. You do not need to destroy the house of your inner world. You only need to begin to see its structure. And when you do, you begin to realize that your life is not a series of random mistakes. It is a process of formation, a process through which your unique shape is slowly emerging, guided by an invisible structure that existed long before you became aware of it. You are not trapped within that structure. You are becoming it consciously. And within this realization, pain begins to lose its absolute power. It is no longer a sentence. It becomes a signal that something deeper is taking form within you. Like a crystal slowly revealing its shape in the darkness, you too are becoming the person you were always shaped to become. Part 4. Instinct. Wearing a mythological face. And as you begin to accept that an invisible structure is shaping your inner life, just as a silent axis shapes the beauty of a crystal, another anxiety may arise. If these patterns existed before you, if they are deeper than your personal will, does that mean you are trapped within a cold and indifferent system? Are you merely the product of ancient, unconscious forces pulled along without any support? Yet it is precisely here that Carl Jung revealed a truth that is not only scientific, but deeply healing. He said that archetypes are not structures foreign to you. They are the psychic face of instinct. They are not forces opposed to you. They are part of the living intelligence that created you. Observe a bird. No one teaches it how to build a nest. There is no school it must attend. No teacher stands beside it to guide each step. Yet at a certain moment in its life, it begins to gather twigs and strands of grass, and it begins to build a shelter. It does not do this through reason. It does it through a deep knowing it has never learned. That knowing does not come from personal experience. It comes from instinct. And Jung realized that at the psychic level, human beings carry similar structures within themselves. He wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective, unconscious archetypes are the psychic counterpart of instinct. This means that just as your body knows how to breathe without your command, just as your heart knows how to beat without being taught, your deeper psyche knows how to feel, how to respond, and how to seek meaning. You did not learn how to long for connection. You did not learn how to fear abandonment. You did not learn how to seek belonging. These tendencies already existed within you, like ancient currents of life flowing through your psychic structure long before you could name them. This is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are connected to an intelligence greater than your conscious self. Jung did not see instinct as something crude or something to be overcome. He saw it as a sacred foundation of psychic life. He wrote, "Instinct is nature's way of acting. Archetype is nature's way of seeing." Let these words settle within you. If instinct is nature's way of acting, then archetype is nature's way of perceiving. This means that you are guided not only by biological impulses, but also by inner images, symbols, and structures of meaning that have existed in the human psyche since the beginning. When you feel drawn to an image, a story, or a dream, it is not random. It is the archetype speaking to you in the ancient language of symbol. This is why myths from thousands of years ago can still touch you today. You never lived in that time. You never met those people. Yet when you hear the story of the hero, the mother, or the solitary wanderer, something within you recognizes it. Not through logic, but through resonance. Because those images do not exist only outside you. They exist within you. You are not merely the reader of the story. You are the place where the story is unfolding. And here, a profound peace begins to emerge. Because if archetypes are the psychic face of instinct, then it means you have not been abandoned on your journey. You are being supported by an evolving intelligence refined across millions of years of living experience. Jung wrote in Symbols of Transformation, in addition to our immediate consciousness, which is of a thoroughly personal nature, there exists a second psychic system of a collective, universal, and impersonal nature. This system does not belong to your ego. It is greater than you. Yet it is not separate from you. It is the foundation upon which your consciousness rests. It is the reason you can find meaning in suffering. It is the reason you can rise again after being wounded. It is the reason that even in your darkest moments, there remains a part of you that is never completely broken, because that part does not belong to your fragile ego. It belongs to something deeper, a structure that existed before any personal wound. This does not mean you will never feel lost, but it means that even when you feel lost, you are still moving within a map you do not need to create from nothing, a map that has always existed quietly, waiting for you to recognize it. And as you begin to trust this, a subtle shift begins to occur. You no longer feel that you must control everything through strained effort. You no longer feel that you must understand everything through intellect alone. You begin to allow yourself to relax, not because you are giving up, but because you are beginning to trust that something deeper within you knows the way. Just as the bird does not need to think in order to build its nest, you do not need to force your becoming. You only need to listen, only to allow, only to remain present with yourself long enough for these deeper structures to reveal themselves. You are not drifting in chaos. You are being carried by an ancient current of life. And when you allow yourself to rest within that current, you do not lose yourself. You begin to find yourself not as an isolated ego, but as part of a living intelligence that has always been there, quietly supporting you, even before you ever knew its name. Part 5. The Sub-Personalities at the Wheel. And as you begin to relax into the awareness that a deeper intelligence is supporting you, an ancient network of instinct and archetype, quietly shaping how you feel and respond. You may believe that this realization will bring complete stability, but instead, you begin to discover another truth, one that may confuse you more than anything before. You begin to realize that sometimes you are not entirely yourself. There are moments when you say things you later regret. There are emotional eruptions you cannot control. There are times when you become weak, afraid, or dependent in ways your conscious ego cannot explain. And in the quiet moments afterward, you ask yourself with a deep sense of unfamiliarity, was that truly me? This question is not a sign of breakdown. It is a sign that you are beginning to see the true structure of your mind. Carl Jung was one of the first to speak this difficult yet liberating truth that the human psyche is not a single unified entity, but an ecosystem composed of multiple centers of psychological energy coexisting within you. He called these centers complexes, and he did not describe them as abstract ideas. He described them as living realities within the psyche. Jung wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. Complexes are psychic fragments which have split off owing to traumatic influences or certain incompatible tendencies. Let this settle within you. A complex is not merely a memory. It is a part of the psyche that has split off, carrying its own energy, its own emotions, and its own perspective. It does not disappear simply because you do not think about it. It exists in the shadows of the unconscious, waiting for the moments when it can rise and take hold of the wheel. This is why at times you may feel as though there are different versions of yourself. One part of you wants to move forward, to love, to trust. But another part contracts doubts and destroys what you are trying to build. One part of you wants to forgive, but another part clings to pain as if it were a shield. These parts are not signs of falseness. They are signs of depth. Jung went even further when he said that complexes do not exist merely as personal memories, but often have an archetypal core. He wrote, complexes behave like independent beings. This is not poetic metaphor. It is clinical observation. Complexes can act like autonomous sub-personalities within you. They have their own emotional reality. They have their own internal logic. And most importantly, they have the capacity to temporarily eclipse your conscious ego. This is why, when a complex is activated, you may feel as though you are being possessed. You are no longer responding from your calm and conscious center. You are responding from somewhere deeper, somewhere older, a place shaped by experiences you may no longer fully remember, but which are still alive within you. Jung described this phenomenon directly and without hesitation in Psychological Types. Everyone knows nowadays that people have complexes. What is not so well known, though, far more important theoretically, is that complexes can have us. Reflect on that. You do not merely have complexes. Complexes can have you. This does not mean you are weak. It means your conscious ego is not the sole center of your psyche. It is only a small island rising above a far greater ocean. This is why you may sometimes feel like a stranger to yourself, not because you are false, not because you are inauthentic, but because you are more complex than you ever imagined. Your ego is the narrator of your story, but it is not the only author. And this is where this understanding begins to become a source of healing rather than a source of fear. Because when you begin to recognize that your extreme reactions are not the entirety of who you are, but expressions of complexes seeking attention, a new distance begins to form. You are no longer completely identical with your anger. You are no longer completely consumed by your fear. You begin to see these forces as parts of you, but not the whole of you. Jung believed that the goal is not to eliminate complexes. The goal is to become conscious of them. He wrote, "The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. This means that when you do not recognize the complexes within you, they will continue to shape your life from behind the scenes. But when you begin to see them, when you begin to recognize when they arise, you begin to reclaim a part of your power you never knew you had lost. You do not need to become a completely different person. You only need to become the observer within yourself. And in that observation, something begins to change. These sub-personalities no longer fully control you. They still exist. They still have their voices. But they are no longer the only ones steering. A deeper center begins to emerge. A center that is not swept away by every emotional wave. A center that Jung called the self, the organizing center of the whole psyche. And when you begin to move from that center, you are no longer a ship drifting helplessly on unconscious currents. You become the one who is learning to navigate the ocean within, not by controlling it, but by understanding it. Part 6. The three faces of the longing for paradise. And as you begin to realize that within you there is not only a single I, but many centers of energy complexes carrying their own memories, emotions, and voices, a deeper question begins to form in silence. If there are forces within you that can make you afraid, make you angry, make you feel like a stranger to yourself, could there also be forces within you capable of guiding you back to wholeness? Within the same psychological structure that created pain, could there also exist patterns with the power to heal? And it is precisely at this intersection that Carl Jung discovered a deeply comforting truth. Archetypes are not only the source of inner conflict, they are also the source of the highest aspirations you have ever felt. Because not all archetypes appear as darkness. Some appear as guiding light. Some do not pull you into unconscious repetition, but draw you toward awakening. These are the archetypes Jung encountered in dreams, in myth, and in the inner journeys of his patients. Primordial images representing the longing to return to wholeness. Jung wrote in the archetypes and the collective unconscious. Archetypes are the living system of reactions and aptitudes that determine the individual's life in invisible ways. This means that not only your fears have ancient roots, your hopes do as well. Not only your pain is shaped by deep structures, your longing, too, is guided by patterns that existed long before you became aware of yourself. This is why, at times, you feel an impulse you cannot explain, a desire to understand more deeply, to be freer, to return to a sense of peace you cannot fully remember, yet somehow recognize. One of the most primordial archetypes, Jung observed, is the archetype of the innocent. This is the part of you that still believes life can be good. The part that continues to hope even after being wounded. The part that longs for safety, not as weakness, but as a deep memory of an original state of wholeness. Jung understood that this part is not childish illusion. It is a trace of the self, the organizing center of the psyche. He wrote, "The self is the goal of life because it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality." 2 essays on analytical psychology. When the innocent archetype is activated, you do not become naive in a negative sense. You become open to the possibility of healing. You begin to believe that you are not forever trapped in your old versions of yourself. You begin to feel that there is a place within you that has never been broken. But the journey does not end there. Because when the innocent awakens longing, the second archetype begins to emerge, the sage. This is the part of you that no longer seeks only to feel better. It seeks to understand. It seeks to see through illusion. It seeks truth even when truth is uncomfortable. This is the part of you that has begun to awaken from unconscious sleep. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The sage does not promise comfort. It promises awareness. It draws you out of the old stories you have told about yourself and invites you to see the deeper structure beneath them. It does not destroy you. It frees you from the illusions you once mistook for your identity. And then, as you begin to see clearly, when you are no longer completely identified with old structures, a third archetype begins to move within you: the explorer. This is the part of you that is no longer afraid to leave what is familiar. The part willing to step into the unknown terrain of your own soul. The part that understands true safety does not come from remaining inside old structures, but from becoming whole. The explorer does not seek perfection. It seeks the truth of lived experience. It understands that the journey is not about becoming someone new, but about returning to who you have always been beneath every mask. Jung called this journey individuation, the process of becoming oneself. He wrote, "Individuation is the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual that is a separate, indivisible unity or whole." This means the journey you are walking is not a deviation. It is not a series of mistakes that must be corrected. It is a return, a process through which the fragmented parts of you are gradually recognized, understood, and integrated into a deeper wholeness. You are not lost. You are moving. And when you look back at your life from this perspective, what once felt like disorientation begins to take on new meaning. Every wound forced you to seek. Every question forced you to go deeper. Every moment you felt you no longer belonged in your old world opened a doorway, leading you closer to yourself. You are not merely living, you are returning. And in that return, you begin to realize that archetypes do not exist to control you. They exist to guide you, not as tyrants, but as ancient companions, parts of a deeper intelligence within you, quietly leading you back to the wholeness you never truly lost. Part 7. The dance of structure and connection. And as you begin to realize that your journey is not a wandering, but a return as you sense the presence of the innocent, who still knows how to hope the sage, who still seeks truth, and the explorer, who still holds the courage to step into the unknown. A profound shift begins to unfold in how you see yourself. You no longer see your soul as a battlefield where unconscious forces compete for control. You begin to see it as a living ecosystem where archetypes exist not only to disrupt, but also to build, not only to question, but to create meaning, not only to awaken you, but to help you shape your life with care, creativity, and deep order. Carl Jung emphasized that archetypes are not merely symbolic images, but living, organizing principles within the psychic structure. He wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective, unconscious archetypes are systems of readiness for action and at the same time images and emotions. This means that archetypes do not only shape how you see the world, they shape how you act within it. They are the source of those deep impulses that move you to protect, to create, to organize, to care, to bring order into chaos. These impulses are not the product of learning. They are the product of being human. Let us begin with the archetype of the caregiver. This is the part of you that feels a natural tenderness in the presence of vulnerability. The part that feels pain when it sees another in pain. The part that longs to support, to protect, to heal. You do not need to be taught how to feel this. You do not need a logical reason to care. It arises as a natural response, like breathing. Jung understood that this energy is not merely a marsupial choice. It is an expression of the deepest structure of the psyche. He wrote, "The archetype represents the essential core of human experience. This means that when you care for others, you are not acting only as an individual. You are expressing an ancient principle that existed long before you were born. You become a channel through which life continues to nourish itself. But the human psyche is not built only to care. It is also built to create. This is where the archetype of the creator begins to move. This is the part of you that cannot fully accept the world as it is. The part that feels compelled to bring something new into existence. Not to prove your worth, but to express something that seeks to be born through you. Jung recognized this energy in art, in dreams, in symbols emerging from the unconscious. He wrote in Man and His Symbols, The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct, acting from inner necessity. This means that creation is not an act of forced will. It is a natural process, like a seed growing into a tree. You do not force it to grow. You simply allow it to express the form it has always carried within itself. And then, as care and creation begin to take shape, a third archetype emerges to bring structure the ruler. This is the part of you that seeks order, not to control the world through fear, but to create stability. This is the part that wishes to build a solid foundation to create a space where life can unfold sustainably. Jung understood that this energy is not an imposition from outside. It is a natural expression of the psyche's movement toward wholeness. He wrote, "The self strives for unity and wholeness." Ion. The ruler within you is not a tyrant. It is the keeper of balance. It is the part that helps you establish boundaries, make decisions, and create a structure in which the other parts of you can coexist without destroying one another. When you begin to recognize these archetypes within yourself, a deep sense of relief begins to emerge. You realize that you do not need to force yourself to become someone worthy. You do not need to strain yourself to create meaning. The energies necessary to build a meaningful life have always existed within you. You do not need to create them. You only need to allow them to express themselves. This realization changes how you relate to the tension you once carried. You no longer feel that you must control everything through rigid willpower. You begin to trust that deeper forces are at work within you, quietly guiding you toward balance, not by forcing you, but by inviting you to cooperate with your own natural structure. And as you relax into this awareness, you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a very long time. Trust. Not blind trust in the external world, but trust in the deep structure of your own soul. You are not a chaotic entity that must be repaired. You are a living system, organizing itself, guided by ancient principles that existed long before you could name them. And in that realization, you no longer feel that you must become someone else. You begin to feel that you can become yourself, not through strained effort, but by allowing these deeper forces to complete the work they have always been doing, shaping you step by step from within. Part 8. The fear of being ordinary. And as you begin to feel that within you already exist the forces that build the caregiver, who knows how to nurture the Creator, who knows how to express, and the ruler who knows how to establish order. You may believe that your inner journey will now become easier, that you can simply relax, and everything will naturally unfold in harmony. But then, from somewhere deeper, an ancient anxiety begins to stir. It does not arrive like a violent storm. It arrives like a silent question, a feeling difficult to name. Does my life truly have meaning? Will I simply pass through this world without leaving any trace? This is one of the deepest fears of being human. Not the fear of pain, but the fear of being ordinary. The fear that you may live, work, love, and then disappear without ever truly becoming the person you sensed you could be. Jung understood that this fear is not a personal weakness. It is the expression of one of the most powerful archetypes in the human psyche beginning to awaken. He wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The archetype is a living system of reactions and aptitudes. This means that when you feel an impulse to transcend yourself, to prove your worth, to struggle against your own limitations, it is not merely personal ambition. It is the hero archetype awakening within you. The hero does not emerge in comfort. It emerges in dissatisfaction. It appears when you can no longer accept living a life constrained by fear. It compels you to step beyond your familiar boundaries, to confront the darkness, and to seek a greater version of yourself. Jung recognized that the image of the hero appears across every culture, every myth, every era, because it is not merely a story. It is a psychological structure. It is the expression of the instinct toward growth. He wrote, "The hero represents the unconscious self, which struggles to emerge into consciousness." But here, a subtle danger begins to arise, because the hero does not carry only strength. It also carries temptation. The temptation to identify completely with the image you believe you must become. The temptation to prove your worth by fulfilling external expectations. And when this happens, the journey of becoming yourself is replaced by the journey of becoming the image you believe the world wants to see. Jung called this phenomenon inflation, the inflation of the ego. He wrote in Ion, "Inflation is a regression of consciousness into the unconscious." This means that instead of becoming more conscious, the ego becomes overwhelmed by the energy of the archetype and begins to believe it is the archetype itself. You no longer simply live your life. You try to become a symbol. You try to become a hero according to the standards of others. And in doing so, you gradually lose connection with your true center. This is where the archetype of the rebel begins to emerge. Not to destroy you, but to destroy the false structures you have built around yourself. The rebel does not care about being accepted. It cares about truth. It forces you to confront the question you have long avoided. Is this life truly yours? Or are you living out a script written by fear and expectation? The rebel does not bring comfort. It brings liberation. It breaks the masks you have worn for too long. It pulls you out of roles you had forgotten you were playing. And then, from within the ruins of those old illusions, a third archetype begins to emerge, the magician. This is not the one who fights. This is not the one who rebels. This is the one who understands. The magician does not seek to conquer the outer world. It transforms the inner world. Jung understood that true transformation does not come from conquering the world, but from integrating the fragmented parts of the psyche. He wrote in 2 essays on analytical psychology. True transformation comes not from suppressing the unconscious, but from becoming conscious of it. The magician represents the capacity to find meaning in what once felt like chaos. It represents the ability to transform pain into understanding, to transform disorientation into direction, to transform ordinariness into wholeness. And here you begin to realize a deeply liberating truth. The fear of being ordinary is not a curse. It is an invitation to step into the journey of becoming yourself. Not the version the world expects, but the version your soul has always carried within. You do not need to become a hero in the eyes of others. You do not need to leave behind a grand mark for your life to have meaning. Because meaning does not come from becoming a symbol. It comes from becoming whole. Jung once wrote a simple yet profound truth. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This is not a journey of conquest. It is a journey of return. And in that return, you begin to understand that the fear of being ordinary is not a sign that you are not enough. It is a sign that something deep within you already knows you were born to become yourself. Not more, not less, but fully and truthfully. Part 9. The language of compensatory dreams. And as you begin to release the need to become a grand image in the eyes of the world, when you stop trying to prove that you are a hero, stop rebelling merely to feel that you exist, and stop forcing yourself to transform according to some external mold, a new silence begins to emerge within you. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a door that has just opened. You are no longer obsessed with who you must become. You begin to listen. And in that listening, another voice begins to emerge, not from the outer world, but from somewhere deeper, older, and more honest. The voice of the unconscious. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to listening to this voice, not through spoken words, but through dreams. He realized that dreams are not random images produced by a resting brain. They are living messages, symbols created by a deeper part of the psyche, attempting to restore the balance that consciousness has lost. Jung wrote in Man and His Symbols, "The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul. Reflect on that image, a small door hidden deep within the innermost chambers of your soul. In your waking life, you are surrounded by logic, responsibility, and the roles you must maintain. You learn to control your emotions. You learn to become rational, efficient, and predictable. But in doing so, a part of you begins to fall behind. A part that is more alive, more chaotic, and more true. And when you sleep, when the ego loosens its grip, that part begins to speak. Jung called this the compensatory function of dreams. He wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, the dreams are the natural reaction of the self-regulating psychic system. This means that your psyche is not passive. It is self-regulating. When your conscious mind becomes too rigid, too confined by logic and control, the unconscious generates images to restore balance. If you become too rational, you may dream in irrational images. If you become too controlling, you may dream of chaos. If you become too identified with a perfect image of yourself, you may dream of the wounded parts you have tried to deny. This is where the trickster archetype enters. The trickster does not appear to destroy you. It appears to liberate you from rigidity. It brings absurdity humor and reversal. It disrupts the stories you once believed were absolute. It confuses you not to weaken you, but to make you more flexible. Jung understood that the trickster is an essential archetype because it breaks apart psychological structures that have become too rigid to allow life to continue flowing. He wrote in 4 archetypes. The trickster is a primitive, cosmic being of divine animal nature. This means that the trickster exists at the boundary between order and chaos, between consciousness and unconsciousness. It does not obey the laws of the ego. It obeys the laws of life itself. This is why your dreams do not always make logical sense. They are not trying to communicate in the language your rational mind expects. They use symbols. They use sensation. They speak in a language older than words. Jung wrote, "Dreams use symbolic language because symbols are the natural language of the unconscious. And when you begin to see dreams in this way, something shifts. You no longer dismiss them as random images. You begin to recognize them as messages, not from an external force, but from a deeper part of yourself. Dreams do not come to mislead you. They come to restore your balance. They are the way your deeper psyche says you have gone too far in one direction. Return. Remember the rest of yourself. This is why Jung did not see the unconscious as an enemy, but as a partner. He wrote in The Practice of Psychotherapy, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature. It is also the source of the highest good." This means that the unconscious does not contain only what you fear. It also contains what you need in order to become whole. It holds images, symbols, and guidance that can help you recover the balance your conscious mind alone cannot achieve. And when you begin to trust this process, you no longer feel that you must control everything. You begin to allow yourself to listen, not with your ears, but with your attention. You begin to realize that a deeper part of you is constantly working to maintain your balance. You have not been abandoned in the darkness of yourself. You are being guided night after night, dream after dream, by an intelligence older than any thought you could create. And in that realization, you no longer fear the unconscious. You begin to trust it as a silent companion that has always been there, waiting for you to listen. Part 10. The Individuation Journey. Becoming unique. And as you begin to listen to your dreams, when you no longer see them as random images, but as messages carrying the power to heal, a profound shift begins to unfold within you. you no longer feel divided between consciousness and the unconscious. You begin to realize that both are participating in a dialogue. One part of you lives in the light, making decisions and building your life, and another part lives in the dark, observing, adjusting, and quietly guiding you back toward balance. It is within this subtle cooperation that a greater process begins to open, a process that Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming an individual. Individuation is not about becoming a perfect version of yourself. It is not about eliminating your weaknesses or constructing a stronger image to gain the world's approval. It is something far deeper. It is the process of becoming whole. Jung defined this clearly in 2 essays on analytical psychology. Individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost last and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. Pause and allow the meaning of those words to settle within you. Becoming an individual does not mean becoming different in outward appearance. It means becoming indivisible within. It means that the parts of you are no longer fragmented, no longer fighting each other in the darkness of the unconscious. It means that the ego, the unconscious, the archetypes, and the self begin to move as a unified whole. This is why individuation is not a journey outward. It is a journey inward. It does not require you to become someone else. It asks you to become yourself, not the version you learned to perform, but the version that has always existed beneath every mask. Jung often used the image of a seed to describe this process, because a seed does not need to be taught how to become a tree. It already carries the blueprint of its own unfolding. It does not try to become another tree. It simply becomes itself. Jung wrote in Ion, "The self is the totality of the whole psyche." This means that within you, there already exists a center of wholeness, the self that contains all your possibilities. Not as abstract potential, but as living patterns gradually seeking expression. You do not need to create the self. You only need to become conscious of it. Individuation is the process through which the archetypes within you begin to integrate, no longer appearing as foreign forces, but as parts of a greater unity. The hero no longer needs to fight to prove its worth. The sage no longer needs to withdraw you from the world. The caregiver no longer needs to sacrifice itself. each begins to find its rightful place within a deeper structure. Jung emphasized that this process is not an arbitrary choice. It is a natural tendency of the psyche. He wrote, "The individuation process is the spontaneous realization of the whole man." This means that individuation is not a task you must complete through forced effort. It is a natural unfolding, like a child growing into an adult or a seed becoming a tree. You do not force it. You simply create the conditions that allow it to emerge. This is why Jung did not see perfection as the goal of life. He saw wholeness as the goal. Perfection is an ideal of the ego. Wholeness is the reality of the self. When you try to become perfect, you reject the parts of yourself you cannot accept. But when you become whole, you integrate them. You are no longer divided between light and shadow. You become a living totality. Jung expressed this truth with quiet clarity in Modern Man in Search of a Soul. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This is not a promise of ease. It is an invitation into authenticity, because becoming yourself requires you to release the images you once used to protect yourself. It asks you to face the parts you once denied. But it also brings a profound peace, because you no longer need to struggle to become someone else. You begin to live from your center rather than from external expectations. And as you surrender into this Raz, you begin to feel a subtle transformation. You no longer feel that you must force your life in a certain direction. You begin to sense that your life is unfolding from within. Your choices no longer arise from fear, but from awareness. Your actions are no longer unconscious reactions, but expressions of a deeper center. You are no longer trying to become yourself. You begin to realize that you have always been yourself, and life is simply the process through which that truth slowly reveals itself step by step, like a great tree growing from a seed that carried its form long before it ever touched the light. Part 11. When symbols dissolve into the light, and as you begin to surrender yourself to the flow of individuation, when you no longer strive to become an idealized image, but instead allow yourself to gradually become whole, an even deeper transformation begins to unfold. You no longer recognize archetypes merely as forces influencing you. You begin to realize that these archetypes are not separate entities, but expressions of a deeper center, a center you cannot see directly yet, can feel as a quiet, steady, and complete presence. And it is here that you enter the final stage of the inner journey, the realization that the symbols you once tried to understand, tried to analyze, tried to control, were never the destination. They were only doors. Carl Jung understood clearly the limits of consciousness when confronting the deeper realities of the psyche. He emphasized that archetypes in their original nature cannot be known directly. They do not exist as fixed images that can be grasped by the intellect. They reveal themselves only through symbols, through dreams, through emotions, through numinous experiences that carry a sense of the sacred and transcend logical explanation. Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the collective unconscious. The archetype as such is essentially an unconscious content that is altered by becoming conscious and by being perceived, and it takes its color from the individual consciousness in which it happens to appear. This means that you never see the archetype in its pure form. You only see the way it reflects through the structure of your own consciousness. Just as invisible light becomes visible only when it passes through a prism, archetypes become perceptible only when they manifest through symbols. And because of this, every effort to capture an archetype with the intellect has its limits. Not because you lack intelligence, but because their nature exists beyond the reach of reason. This is where many people become trapped. They try to understand everything. They try to decode every symbol. They try to control every aspect of their inner life. But Jung realized that wholeness does not come from controlling the unconscious. It comes from establishing a relationship with it. He wrote in Ion, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. Pause and truly feel the meaning of this. The self is not only your center, it is the entire structure that embraces both what you know and what you do not know. It does not exist only in the light of consciousness. It also exists in the darkness of the unconscious. It does not exclude contradiction. It contains contradiction. It does not reject the parts of you you once feared. It integrates them. This is why true peace does not come from eliminating the darkness, but from realizing that both light and darkness belong to the same totality. Throughout your journey, you have encountered many archetypes: the hero, the sage, the trickster, the caregiver, the explorer. Each carries a fragment of truth, Each reveals an aspect of the deeper structure within you, but none of them is the entirety of who you are. They are like stars in a vast sky, and the self is that sky. Jung expressed this with quiet depth in 2 essays on analytical psychology. The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. The self is not an image you must become. It is a reality you gradually come to recognize. It is not a destination in the future. It has always existed within you, quietly, organizing every experience, every dream, every longing toward a single direction, toward wholeness. This is why, at this stage of the journey, you no longer need to strive so intensely. You do not need to explain every symbol. You do not need to control every emotion. You do not need to understand everything immediately, because wholeness does not come from grasping. It comes from allowing. Jung called this a numinous experience, an experience you cannot create by force of will, but can recognize when it appears. He wrote, "The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego." This does not mean the ego is destroyed. It means the ego is no longer the only center. It learns to release its need to control everything. It learns to trust a deeper structure, and within that surrender, a new peace emerges. Not the peace of having every question answered, but the peace of no longer needing to know every answer. You begin to feel that you are no longer an isolated entity struggling to find your place in a meaningless universe. You begin to feel that you are part of a living structure, a structure that has always included you, always supported you, even when you did not yet recognize it. You are no longer standing outside yourself, trying to understand yourself as an object. You begin to live from within yourself. And when that happens, symbols are no longer puzzles to be solved. They become guides, not to take you somewhere else, but to help you realize that you have always been exactly where you needed to be within the self, the center, where all contradictions dissolve, where every part of you is allowed to exist, and where wholeness is no longer a goal, but a reality, gradually revealing itself in the light of awareness. Part 12. Sinking into the primordial matrix. And as you begin to realize that the self is not merely a concept, but a living experience, when you stop trying to grasp symbols and instead allow them to dissolve into a larger feeling of wholeness. Something profoundly gentle begins to happen within you. The quiet tension you have carried throughout your life, the tension of needing to become someone, needing to understand everything, needing to control everything, begins to soften. Not all at once, but gradually, like ice melting under the warmth of a quiet morning sun. You no longer feel separate from your own mind, as though you were an observer standing outside, trying to manage a system too vast to comprehend. Instead, you begin to feel yourself as part of it, not trapped within it, not defined by it, but emerging from it, like a wave emerging naturally from the ocean that created it. And in this softening, you begin to approach one of the deepest layers of Jung's vision, the return to the collective unconscious, not as a place of darkness, but as a place of origin. Carl Jung never saw the collective unconscious as something hostile. He saw it as the living foundation of the psyche itself. He wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The collective unconscious is the deepest layer of the psyche, containing the inherited psychic structures common to all humanity. This means that at the deepest level, you are no longer only an isolated individual. You are a unique expression of a shared structure, one that has existed long before you were born and will continue long after you are gone. The archetypes you have encountered, the hero, the sage, the caregiver, the trickster, are not rulers over you. They are movements within this greater field. They are forms through which life becomes aware of itself through you. And now, as you loosen your identification with the ego, as you no longer experience your complexes as the entirety of who you are, something shifts. The archetypes move. They no longer stand at the center of your identity. They become like stars, present, luminous, meaningful, but no longer overwhelming. And you begin to realize something subtle, yet liberating. You are not the stars. You are the sky in which they appear. Jung expressed this realization with quiet precision in Ion. The self is the total, timeless man. Timeless. Not confined to your personal story. Not confined to your successes or failures. Not confined to the memories you carry or the roles you have played. The self exists as a deeper center, a presence that remains even as everything else changes. And as you begin to sense this, your experience of yourself becomes softer. You no longer feel the need to hold everything together with effort. You no longer feel the need to protect a fragile image in order to exist. You begin to let go. Not because you are giving up, but because you realize there was never anything to hold in the first place. Your breath becomes a bridge. Each inhale receives life. Each exhale returns it. Nothing is owned. Nothing is lost. There is only movement. Jung described this state as the reconciliation between consciousness and the unconscious. He wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, the goal of psychic development is the union of conscious and unconscious. This is not a victory of consciousness over the unconscious. It is a union, a realization that both were always part of the same whole. You are no longer an ego trying to control an ocean of unconscious forces. You are the ocean experiencing itself through a point of awareness you call I. And as this realization settles, a deeper peace begins to emerge. Not the peace of solving every problem, but the peace of no longer being defined by them. You begin to feel supported by something you cannot see, but have always depended on, like the ground beneath your feet, always present, even when you forgot it was there. Jung reflected on this in Memory's Dreams, Reflections. In the end, the only events in my life worth telling are those when the imperishable world erupted into this transitory one. The imperishable world. Not a physical place, but a state of being. A state in which you realize that beneath every change, beneath every loss, beneath every fear, there remains something within you that cannot be broken. And now, as you rest here, you no longer need to hold on to your thoughts. You can allow them to come and allow them to go. You no longer need to cling to images, because you know now you are not the images. You are the space in which they appear. You are not a separate self struggling against invisible forces. You are life itself, becoming aware of itself, quietly, gently through you. And in this realization, sleep is no longer a loss of consciousness. It becomes a return to the deeper ground from which every symbol, every dream, every archetype first emerged. You do not disappear into the darkness. You dissolve into the vastness that has always held you. Let your breath carry you there, not as an ending, but as a return. Rest now. You are already home.